Okay, we continue with part 10 of Federalist number 9. In the last video, I mentioned to you that you might get frustrated as you go through these essays because sometimes some paragraphs don't make sense. Some of the stuff that are mentioned don't make sense, but it will once you finish all of the essays and get the big picture. And I shared with you that the first time I read all of them, it was really frustrating because I didn't have the general picture in my mind. And you have to remember that these were written 230 years ago. You have to remember right now when we're reading Federalist number 9, they don't know exactly what they're going to say in Federalist 45. I mean, they have an idea, but as we said, they're responding to their critics as well as explaining federalism, explaining the U.S. Constitution. So they had to improvise sometimes, as you would say, just they had to say, okay, somebody is criticizing for this, we have to tackle it this way. So if you read the papers individually, they're not going to make sense. There's 2 or 3 papers that are, more than 2 or 3, that are really good. You will get some sort of a picture, but I don't think you will get the whole picture or a good picture till you read the whole thing. Like here in Federalist number 9, for the first time he mentions, in a small paragraph, he mentions the most important thing about this union, any government, that you have to have checks and balances, that you have to have division of power, so that one side, a president, will not usurp power, take power in his or her hand and run over everybody else, or that Congress would not usurp its power. Or even in Congress, if the House decides to get out of hand and usurp the power given to it, the Senate might be a check on it. And then you have independent judiciary that will say, no, wait a minute. That's not what the Constitution says. The law you just passed may be good for your state, may be good for your city, but it's not good for the country, for the good of the country. So that's probably one of the most important parts of this talk about framing a government, establishing a government, but he says it in just one short paragraph and then he goes to other things. So keep that in mind. And gradually it will all make sense. And if you happen to be a person that have just tuned in, my suggestion is to try to start from the very first part, the first video that I've put up, because this whole project that we're on will make a little bit more sense to you, I believe. Okay. So Hamilton quoted 5 short paragraphs from Montesquieu's work, saying that even Montesquieu says you can make a Confederate Republic that will be good for you. But at the last paragraph he says, well, what if it falls apart? So what? You go back to being a sovereign republic and you're back to where you were. But the whole plan of this federal union is that you don't have to think every 5 years that you're just going to fall apart, that you don't know what's going to happen in the long term. Your future happiness and prosperity will be jeopardized. You will become a tool in the hands of monarchical powers. So they're trying to establish something that will work for a long time. He said the new science of politics. He is indirectly saying, again, I'm sorry to use this phrase, But he's saying we're human beings, we're creative, we're not stupid. We don't have to make the same mistake over and over again. We've got over 2,500 years of written history. We can read, see what's happened. We have our own history. We've just seen what has happened this past 30, 40, 50 years. What the British did to us, how our governments in different states are not working well in some parts and not. We can learn and plan something new, a new plan of government. This Constitution is the new plan for you, he says. Okay. Now I'll read the next paragraph. I have thought it proper to quote at length these interesting passages because they contain a luminous abridgment of the principal arguments in favor of the Union. He says, I went ahead and quoted everything that Montesquieu had said, and I didn't even cut any part of it because it shines light on what we want to do. It even says that the plan that we have for this union, it indirectly says that it's a great plan and must effectually remove the false impressions which a misapplication of other parts of the world was calculated to produce. They have at the same time an intimate connection with the more immediate design of this paper, which is to illustrate the tendency of the Union to repress domestic faction and insurrection. So this part, you have to read the rest of the Federalist to just kind of understand this part. So again, he wants to bring to your attention that a federal union doesn't allow a faction to tear the country apart. A federal union defends the union, defends every state's sovereignty, people's freedom, and confronts or quells, puts down insurrections, and a whole bunch of other ideas for a whole bunch of other things that would be to your benefit. And he's going to say that in these papers, in these essays, we will explain them to you. We will share them with you. Okay, this next paragraph, I might not be able to squeeze it in this video, so just let me take this time to share with you some thoughts and ideas. When we go through these Federalist Papers, just remember, sometimes there's a play on words. Sometimes they say national government, sometimes they say federal, sometimes they say confederal. So those terms, you just have to wait till you read the whole thing and let me help explain some things to you for them to make sense. Sometimes they use the word consolidation. Consolidation. It means that the states are complaining that this union that you're proposing is going to consolidate power. It's going to just gather all the power in their hands and take the state sovereignty away. So when they use consolidation, it just means it has a negative meaning. It's like, they're going to take all the power and run away with it. There will not be any power left to the states. States will lose their sovereignty. And they were very afraid of it back then because remember, they just fought a war. They're saying if in London Parliament sits and doesn't pay attention to us, why should we think that, let's say in Philadelphia, if that's where the capital is going to be, South Carolinians or Georgians are going to say, what makes us think that they're going to pay attention to us? Because it's important to remember, if you're in Georgia, South Carolina, right by the Atlantic Ocean, it might take you 60 days to get to London on a ship. Okay? Or not 60 days, I'm sorry. I was thinking round trip. But it'll take you almost 40 days to go on a ship to London. Now, if you're sitting in Georgia and let's say if they decide the capital is going to be in New York City, it might take you on a carriage almost 20 days, if the weather is good, to get to New York. So back then, it's one of the most important things for you to remember the distance and what it meant back then. No radio, no telephone, no fax, no email. You just write the letter and the carrier has to take it. You want to go somewhere, you get in a carriage. If you want to be comfortable, have money, go there. It might take you 20 days to get up there. So it really doesn't matter if it takes you 20 days or 40 days. You almost feel like it's a world away. So keep these in mind, because with our lifestyles, the modernity, how we live, how we transmit ideas is totally different from how they did it back then. And it's real easy to forget that. It's extremely easy to forget that. And if you have paid attention to the first videos I posted, I said our world has changed. But unfortunately, our leaders are still thinking they're not thinking. They definitely are not thinking about the future of all of us. We are in the middle of, I think, one of the greatest revolutions in the world, in world history. This is 10,000 times bigger than the printing press revolution. What happened, what change that brought. Because now, even back then, you had to be able to afford a book, you had to be able to read a book to get ideas. But now, with the help of a little cell phone, just like the one I'm using right now, an inexpensive cell phone like the one I'm using right now, I can finish this video, transmit this idea to the other side of the world, and all that other person needs is a little Wi-Fi and a phone to see what I'm saying and what I'm sharing with them. It's immediate. You don't need a middleman. So our world is changing, but unfortunately our leaders are sound asleep. So keep this in mind and we'll just go along, chug along.